My brother attempted to steal 50% of my company using forged documents. When I uncovered his plot, I chose to utterly dismantle his life with evidence he could never escape. I am 35 years old and the sole owner of a successful chain of fitness centers across North Texas. We currently operate 4 locations, with 2 more slated for development next year. Our annual sales reach approximately $1.2 million, and I provide employment for a team of around 50 people, from personal trainers and front desk associates to maintenance staff and administrative personnel. It is not a bad outcome for someone who started with nothing more than the GI Bill and a relentless drive after honorably discharging from the Marine Corps at 23. This, however, isn't a chronicle of my entrepreneurial journey or a tale of building an empire from scratch. This is the story of how my toxic, dysfunctional family relentlessly tried to bleed me dry for years, and what happened when I finally decided to bring about their complete ruin instead of just walking away like a normal, decent person might. Growing up in a suburb of Dallas, the family dynamics were established early on. There were 2 children in our home, myself and my younger brother, Kyle, who is now 32. Kyle was perpetually the golden child, incapable of any wrongdoing in our parents' estimation. In contrast, I was consistently cast in the role of the hyper-responsible one who never seemed to need attention, help, or even simple acknowledgement. You understand this kind of family setup. Kyle would receive thunderous applause for tying his shoes correctly, while I had to earn every single thing through a grueling combination of blood, sweat, tears, and impeccable conduct. When I was 17, a senior in high school, I balanced 2 part-time jobs every day after classes to save enough for a decent used car. I bagged groceries and wrangled shopping carts at a local supermarket, and I spent my weekends doing hard manual labor for a landscaping business under the brutal Texas sun. During this same period, Kyle was caught shoplifting video games from the mall. Instead of facing any meaningful consequences for his criminal behavior, my parents bought him a brand new Honda Civic to, in their words, bolster his confidence and self-worth. When I inquired about my own car after 8 months of diligently saving every dollar I earned, my father simply looked at me and stated, "You're the responsible and mature one. You'll figure it out on your own, just like you always do." Upon graduating from high school, I enlisted in the Marines because college was a financial impossibility for me. Our family was supposedly struggling, barely making ends meet, and unable to afford tuition. Yet, miraculously, Kyle enjoyed a full college experience, funded by a mysterious, secret stockpile of money that our parents could materialize out of nowhere whenever their precious boy required something essential. I served for 5 years in the Marine Corps, completed 2 overseas deployments, and came home armed with discipline, an unwavering work ethic, and invaluable real-world experience. I leveraged my GI Bill benefits to earn a business degree while working full-time at a large gym chain, where I absorbed every facet of the fitness industry from the inside out. For 3 years, I lived in a tiny studio apartment that was little more than a glorified closet, subsisting on a diet of cheap pasta, canned tuna, and peanut butter sandwiches, meticulously saving every penny to launch my first gym. And Kyle. He dropped out of college after 3 years filled with nonstop partying, 4 major changes, and grades that were barely passing. But in my parents' narrative, He was merely finding his true path and exploring his creative options. By the time I turned 30, I had 2 flourishing gyms, a comfortable house in a good neighborhood, and I was on a solid path to building genuine generational wealth. Kyle, at 27, had never held a single job for more than 8 months. His pattern was depressingly predictable. He would get an entry-level position, work just long enough to become eligible for unemployment benefits, then deliberately get himself fired and live off government assistance while he waited for the perfect career opportunity to find him. Yet, guess who remained the family's undisputed favorite? He had never accomplished anything of substance or value in his entire adult life. Then Kyle met Tiffany, and that is when our family's dynamic shifted from merely annoying to utterly farcical. Tiffany was the embodiment of every negative stereotype about materialistic, shallow women, all rolled into one grating personality. She had artificial breast implants, lip fillers, eyelash extensions, and acrylic nails so long and ornate that they prevented her from performing basic tasks like typing on a keyboard or unlocking a car door. She had never worked a real job in her life, yet she always possessed the newest iPhone, designer handbags that cost thousands, and outfits that were more expensive than most people's monthly mortgage payments. She attached herself to Kyle like a parasitic organism because he was gullible and naive enough to believe he could support her ludicrously extravagant lifestyle on his unemployment checks. And my parents, they absolutely adored her, convinced she would inspire Kyle to become more ambitious and finally mature into a responsible adult. Oh, he was inspired all right. Inspired to find more and more creative ways to spend money he didn't have and would never earn. The woman also possessed the cognitive capacity of a common houseplant. I vividly remember one particularly excruciating family dinner where she asked if my fitness centers were like Planet Fitness, but for rich people, and then proceeded to confidently lecture me on the intricacies of the fitness industry, with her knowledge based solely on romantic comedies and reality television shows. This brilliant analysis came from a person who genuinely believed that cardiovascular exercise was unhealthy because it made you too skinny and weak. About 2.5 years ago, the phone calls from my parents became noticeably more frequent and urgent. These were not casual, "Hey, how's business?" check-ins. They were direct, emergency-style pleas. Kyle needs help with his power bill, or Kyle's car needs a major repair, or my personal favorite, Kyle and Tiffany are having an unexpectedly tight month financially. Initially, the amounts they requested seemed minor and manageable. $400 for utilities, $600 for car trouble. I won't deny it. I helped them out. I thought that's what family does for each other in times of need. But with every transfer I made, Kyle never once called to say thank you or explain the situation himself. Mom always made the initial request on his behalf, and then followed up with the thank you call, treating him like a helpless child who couldn't manage his own affairs. The amounts requested steadily grew larger, and the excuses became more elaborate and dramatic. It was $1,200 for a security deposit on a much nicer apartment, because their current one was supposedly triggering Tiffany's terrible allergies. She wanted a more Instagram-worthy backdrop. Then it was $2,800 when Kyle was supposedly laid off unexpectedly, which I later learned meant he was fired for showing up 2 hours late, 3 days in a row, while intoxicated. Then came the $3,500 for Tiffany's emergency dental work, which turned out to be purely cosmetic veneers because she decided she wanted to be a social media influencer. The breaking point should have been last Christmas when Tiffany posted a lavish series of Instagram stories documenting her week-long luxury spa retreat in Scottsdale, Arizona, complete with high-end treatments and designer shopping sprees. This was the very same week that Kyle had called me, sobbing, to plead for $2,200 for urgent car repairs that absolutely could not wait. But like a complete fool, I was still committed to playing the role of the good, supportive brother. The real, undeniable wake-up call came 8 months ago when I went to my parents' house for our usual Sunday family dinner. As I walked through the door, Tiffany was practically shoving her left hand into everyone's face, showing off an obscenely large engagement ring that must have cost at least $20,000. "Look what my amazing Kyle surprised me with," she squealed like an overexcited teenager. "Isn't it just perfect? I've been dropping hints about something exactly like this for months and months." I looked directly at Kyle, who was avoiding my gaze with the intensity of someone whose life depended on it. Just 4 weeks prior, he had called me in a panic, claiming he needed $3,800 for unforeseen medical expenses because he lacked health insurance. "That's quite an impressive ring," I commented, struggling to keep my voice neutral. "Must have been a significant investment." Tiffany just laughed and did this ridiculous little hair flip gesture. "Oh, Kyle always finds a way to give me exactly what I deserve. He's just so generous and thoughtful when it comes to showing his love." Yes, generous with my hard-earned money and thoughtful about keeping that fact hidden from me. During that same dinner from hell, Tiffany made several passive-aggressive comments about how some people just aren't relationship material, all while staring directly at me with a look of pure judgment. I was 35 and single by choice, having been far too focused on building my business empire and securing my financial future to seriously consider dating or marriage. But she made it sound as though I was a pathetic failure for not being married to a financial vampire like herself. "Maybe you should focus less on those gym things and more on finding a wife," she suggested with a patronizing smirk. "I mean, what's the point of all that money if you have no one special to spend it on?" My own mother actually nodded in fervent agreement, as if Tiffany had just dispensed some profound wisdom. "She makes a very good point, Mason. You can't just work all the time forever." That night, lying in my own bed in my own house that I paid for with my own money, I made a firm decision. I was done. I was officially closing their personal bank account. For a few months after I stopped answering their increasingly frantic calls for money, things went unusually quiet. I genuinely hoped they had either learned a lesson in fiscal responsibility or found some other gullible soul to finance their delusional lifestyle. I was profoundly wrong on both counts. Then my mom called 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and I should have known from her tone alone that something was amiss. "Mason, sweetheart," she began, using that unnaturally sweet, overly cheerful voice she reserves for when she wants something of monumental importance. "Are you planning to join us for Thanksgiving dinner this year?" Honestly, I had been contemplating skipping the whole ordeal. Every family gathering had become an exhausting theatrical performance where I was cast as the successful son who should be eternally grateful for the privilege of solving everyone else's financial and personal crises. But I made a fatal error and said, "Sure, I'll be there." "Oh, that's just wonderful," Mom chirped, her relief and delight far too extreme for a simple holiday dinner confirmation. It'll be so lovely to have the whole family together for such a special occasion. The sheer joy and palpable relief in her voice should have been the first massive red flag. Mom was never genuinely excited about holiday dinners unless there was a significant ulterior motive at play. When I arrived at their house on Thanksgiving morning, Tiffany answered the door wearing what looked like a brand-new, head-to-toe designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. Her acrylic nails were freshly manicured with an intricate crystal and glitter design that must have taken hours at a high-end salon. "Mason!" she exclaimed, her smile so painfully fake it was almost a caricature. "Oh my gosh! Thank goodness you're finally here. We've just been waiting and waiting for you." Red flag number 1 was now waving frantically in my face. Kyle was standing in the living room, looking more anxious and agitated than I had ever seen him. He could barely tear his eyes away from his phone, and his leg was bouncing up and down with a nervous energy that suggested he was genuinely worried about something catastrophic happening. "Hey, bro," he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact. Red flag number 2 had joined the first in a growing parade of warning signs. Dad was acting normally, asking his usual superficial questions about my gyms, while Mom bustled around the kitchen with an unnecessary level of dramatic flair. Everything seemed deceptively normal until we all sat down to eat. Mom cleared her throat in a very particular way and gave me a specific look. The same look she used to give me as a child right before asking me to do extra chores that Kyle was always excused from. "So Mason," she began, carving her turkey with an almost surgical precision, "Kyle and Tiffany have some very exciting news to share with the family. Here it comes," I thought, whatever elaborate scheme they've cooked up this time. Kyle squirmed in his seat as if he were sitting on a pile of sharp rocks. We're getting married next month." "Congratulations," I said, but something felt wrong about the aggressive timeline. "Why the sudden rush?" "It's going to be absolutely perfect and beautiful," Tiffany gushed, practically vibrating with excitement. "A small ceremony, just immediate family, very intimate and romantic." Mom beamed with pride. "They found the most perfect venue, so elegant and sophisticated." I waited, knowing from years of experience that the other shoe was about to drop. "The only thing is," Kyle finally said, his eyes fixed firmly on his dinner plate, "we're just a little short on the deposit for the venue and all the catering costs." And there it was. The real reason for this command performance family dinner. "How short are we talking exactly?" I asked, knowing the number would be utterly preposterous. Kyle and Tiffany exchanged one of those loaded glances that couples share before a financial shakedown. Then Tiffany leaned forward, a grotesquely entitled smile plastered on her face that made my skin crawl. "It's honestly not that much when you really think about it," she said dismissively, waving her hand as if discussing pocket change. "Just $22,000. I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. $22,000. "Well," Mom interjected immediately, clearly having rehearsed her part, "when you break it down, it's actually quite reasonable for a quality wedding. The venue is $6,000, the catering is $10,000, flowers are $3,000, and then you have the photographer, the music, the cake, all the essentials." "Hold on a second," I said, my voice firm. "You haven't actually paid for any of this yet." Tiffany's fake smile tightened. "We've put down small deposits to hold the dates, but the final payments are all due next Friday." I slowly looked around the table. Every single person was staring at me expectantly, as if this whole charade had been pre-scripted and I was just the final actor who needed to hit his mark, open his wallet, and solve their problems. "And you expect me to pay for your entire wedding?" "Not pay for it exactly," Kyle stammered, trying to sound reasonable. "More like help out. A lot. You know, as a generous wedding gift from my successful big brother." Tiffany let out a laugh, and it was the most condescending sound I had ever heard. "I mean, what else are you going to spend your money on? You don't have a wife or kids or any real family commitments. Your parents only love you when you pay their bills." The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Even my parents looked shocked at how brutally and directly she had just insulted me. I carefully placed my fork on my plate, leaned back, and looked at my mother. "Is that true, Mom?" Instead of denying it, Mom smiled and nodded. "Well, if you're not going to help your family, then you can't be part of the family anymore. You can't come if you won't pay off your brother's credit card." The words hit me like a physical punch. After everything I had done, all the money I had given them over the years, this is all I was to them, a walking wallet. I stood up slowly, picked up my jacket, and smiled back at her. "You know what? You are absolutely right, and that's why you will never see me again." The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate and seismic. Mom's confident smirk vanished. Dad's face went pale. Kyle looked as if he'd been physically struck. Tiffany's arrogant expression crumbled as the reality of the situation dawned on her. Their faces fell in unison as they realized they had just lost me for good. "Wait, Mason, I didn't mean," Mom started, but I was already heading for the door. "Yes, you did, and now you get to live with the consequences." I walked out the front door and did not look back. For 3 weeks after that Thanksgiving disaster, my phone vibrated nonstop with messages from my family. Mom sent novel-length, guilt-tripping texts about how deeply hurt she was by my selfish behavior. Dad left voicemails lecturing me about family loyalty. Kyle sent a series of pathetic messages whining about how I was ruining his special day. But the most unhinged and entertaining messages came from Tiffany. She sent me multi-paragraph essays, calling me a greedy, bitter man who was obviously jealous of Kyle's happiness. She called me pathetic for being single at my age, implied I was probably gay, and ended with vague threats about how I would regret my decision when Kyle became a huge success. The irony was breathtaking. She was calling me jealous while literally begging for my money to fund her fantasy wedding. I screenshotted every single message and saved them. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the communication stopped. I assumed they'd either found a new sucker to fund the wedding or had downsized to something they could afford. As usual, I was wrong. 4 weeks later, a friend of mine, a loan officer at a large regional bank, called with some disturbing information. "Hey, weird thing happened at work," he said casually. "Your brother and his fiancée were in our main branch this afternoon." My stomach dropped. What were they doing there? They were applying for a substantial business loan. But here's the crazy part. They were using your fitness centers as collateral. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "They had paperwork that looked official, claiming your brother was a 50% partner in your company. The loan officer they met with got a bad feeling because the documents looked forged. They didn't approve anything, but I thought you needed to know." I hung up and immediately called my business attorney. After a thorough investigation, we discovered that Kyle and Tiffany had been making the rounds at banks all over the Dallas area, using completely fabricated documents to claim Kyle was a major owner of my business. They had even faked employment records listing him as my director of operations with an annual salary of $85,000. They were actively trying to commit major fraud against my business, my credit, and my financial standing. That was the moment I knew they had crossed a line from which there was no return. I didn't just want to walk away anymore. I wanted to utterly destroy them. Over the next 6 weeks, I systematically gathered every piece of information I could find. I didn't hire private investigators. I just started paying attention and asking the right questions to the right people. First, I confirmed the wedding was still on. They had scraped together enough for a small ceremony at a budget venue outside the city. But Tiffany was spinning a narrative on social media that they had chosen an intimate wedding, and that unsupportive people were not invited, framing my refusal to fund them as me being deliberately excluded. Then I found something fascinating about Tiffany's past. My banker friend remembered she had come into his branch months earlier, when she and Kyle first got serious. She was trying to open a business account for a multi-level marketing scheme. During the routine credit check, several massive red flags popped up. I asked him to dig a little deeper. We discovered Tiffany had a well-documented financial history with men. She had been married twice before, both times to men of significant means. Both marriages lasted just long enough for her to gain legal access to their finances before ending in messy divorces, where she walked away with a substantial portion of their assets, claiming emotional and physical abuse. Kyle was set to be husband number 3, completely oblivious to husbands 1 and 2. But that wasn't even the best part. The most valuable information I uncovered was about their current financial state. Remember all those emergencies Kyle needed my help with? They were real, in a sense. He had been sinking into massive debt trying to keep up with Tiffany's spending. Instead of being honest, they were taking out high-interest payday loans, opening new credit cards, and borrowing from anyone they could. They weren't just broke. They were catastrophically, hopelessly broke. The kind of broke where one missed payment sends the entire house of cards tumbling down. And Tiffany had no idea. Kyle had been desperately hiding the truth from her, frantically trying to keep the money flowing to maintain the illusion of success. That's when I realized Kyle wasn't just a spoiled brat anymore. He was trapped and terrified, in way over his head with a woman who would gut him the second she learned he couldn't afford her. So I decided to accelerate the discovery process. The wedding was on a Saturday in February. I did not attend. I had bigger plans. I had spent weeks compiling a comprehensive dossier, screenshots of Tiffany's abusive texts, copies of the fraudulent loan documents, and the crown jewel, a detailed background report on Tiffany's 2 prior marriages, her history of financial manipulation, and exhaustive proof of their current, crushing debt. I didn't send this to Kyle. He wouldn't have believed me. Instead, I sent the entire package directly to Tiffany's mother. My research revealed that her family was genuinely wealthy, but they were obsessed with social status and public reputation. Her father was an investment banker, and her mother was a high society woman who valued appearances above all else. They were funding Tiffany, assuming she was with a successful, stable man. They had no idea Kyle was bankrupt, and they certainly didn't know about their daughter's pattern of marrying for money. I sent the package with a simple note. I thought you should know who your daughter married and the financial reality she has entered. The wedding was on Saturday. By Monday morning at 8 a.m., my phone was ringing off the hook. It was Kyle. He sounded more broken than any human I've ever heard. "Mason," he choked out, his voice trembling. I need to talk to you. It's an emergency. What's wrong, Kyle? Can you meet me somewhere, please? I'll buy coffee, whatever you want. He sounded shattered. I almost felt pity for him. Almost. We met at a coffee shop. When Kyle walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were shaking, and he kept glancing around nervously. She's gone, he said without any greeting. Who's gone? Tiffany. She left me, took everything and just disappeared. I raised an eyebrow. Everything? Kyle nodded miserably. All the wedding gifts, the honeymoon money her parents gave us, even the security deposit on our apartment. She cleaned out our joint bank account to the last cent and vanished. What happened? Her parents called her Sunday morning. They somehow got all this information about our real finances, my job situation, the debts. They flew down here and had a massive screaming match with her in the hotel lobby. Kyle ran his hands through his hair frantically. She tried to tell them it was all lies, but they started asking specific questions about the credit card debt, the loans. She realized it was all true. She realized you're broke. Worse than broke, we're over $50,000 in debt. Her parents cut her off completely, told her she was on her own. And Tiffany, he let out a humorless laugh. She just looked at me and said, I didn't sign up to be poor, and walked out of my life. I sipped my coffee and waited. Mason, I'm screwed. Utterly ruined. The rent is due, all the credit card payments are due, and I have nothing. I'm going to lose everything. What about Mom and Dad? Kyle's face crumpled with shame. They don't know how bad it really is. They think I just need help with a few bills. If they knew the truth, they'd disown me. You know how Dad is about financial irresponsibility. I nearly laughed at the irony. Dad, who had enabled Kyle's irresponsible behavior his entire life. Kyle looked at me with the most pathetic, pleading eyes I'd ever seen. I know I've messed up. I know I've been a terrible brother, but I'm begging you, Mason. Please help me one last time. I need you more than I've ever needed anything. How much help are we talking about? $50,000, minimum. Maybe 60 to get completely clear and start over. I leaned back and studied his desperate face. $60,000 to fix a mess he created. You know what, Kyle? You're right. You did mess everything up and you have been a terrible brother. But more than that, you've been a user and a parasite. For years, you've treated me like an ATM. You never once asked how I was doing, never offered to help me with anything, never even said thank you when I bylaid you out. Mason, please, I'm begging you. I'm not finished. My voice was ice cold. You married a gold-digging manipulator who insulted me in my parents' home, and then you tried to commit fraud using my business. You have spent years taking advantage of my success while contributing nothing but drama and financial emergencies. Kyle was openly weeping now. I know, it's all true. I'll change, I swear. I'll get a real job. I'll pay you back every penny with interest. No, you won't, I said, standing up to put on my jacket. You won't change because you've never had to face a single real consequence. Every time you screwed up, someone was there to fix it. Mom, Dad, me. We've all been enabling your pathetic behavior for decades. I looked down at him, a broken man-child in a coffee shop chair. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home and figure this out by yourself. You're going to get whatever job you can find and work your way out of this hole, $1 at a time. And maybe in a few years, if you learn something and demonstrate actual change, we can talk about having a relationship. Mason, please don't do this. I'm your brother. No, I said, walking to the door without a backward glance. You're my parents' son. There's a big difference. I walked away and left him there. 6 months later, I heard from Mom that Kyle had declared bankruptcy. He was living in a tiny studio apartment across town, working double shifts loading trucks at a warehouse for minimum wage. Tiffany had married a corporate lawyer she met on a dating app 2 months after leaving Kyle. My parents still pressure me to help him, to be the bigger person, because blood is thicker than water. I tell them the same thing I told Kyle. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences. Kyle still calls me sometimes, every few weeks. He doesn't ask for money anymore. He learned that lesson. He's just trying to check in to slowly rebuild something. The conversations are awkward and strained, but maybe that's what real growth feels like.